back of your mind what it felt like to be bent over, what it felt like to not be able to see straight ahead or straight up. And think of what it might have been like for this woman as we reflect on the meaning of the scripture. Now I'd like to begin with a story. It's by Dan Clendenin. It's from a series of articles called The Journey with Jesus. And he reflects on a part of this story in a modern day context. Back in 2005, when I was in Ethiopia, I took a day trip to the mountains that surround the capital city of Addis Ababa. At the summit, our group prayed over the city, enjoyed the panoramic views, identified buildings in the distance below, and gasped for breath after walking uphill in the alpine air. That was the fun part. The disturbing part was our climb from the city center at 7,000 feet to the summit at 11,000 feet. As our minivan belched clouds of light blue exhaust, the higher we went, the more women and girls we passed, carrying loads of firewood back down the mountain. Barefoot and bent over at the waist, these women carried 75-pound bundles of eucalyptus saplings, 7 feet wide, across their back this way, down to the city center, about 10 miles away, all for a few pennies. Reflecting on this reminded me of the woman in Luke's story. Making a medical diagnosis of her 2,000 years after the fact is futile. I wonder if she was just plain worn out from a hard life of manual labor. Like the firewood carriers in Addis Ababa, her condition reflected the complex interplay of vicious causes and consequences. Medical infirmity, community indifference, social marginalization, economic injustice, and oppressive gender roles. This gives us one example of what a story like that might have been like, as he was moved with compassion to see these women and girls carrying these bundles. There are, of course, places all around the world where people suffer from oppression in such ways that weighs on their spirit and their body and their soul. And Jesus, of course, came to alleviate that suffering, to lift those burdens in whatever way that he could. And here Jesus is moved with compassion to lift this particular woman's burden as well. We don't exactly know what her story is, but we know that she was in need of healing and Jesus offered her help. Jesus offers her freedom. That word free, again, is used in this story. And I think of this as almost like a second part in the series of Free to Be Me, as we reflect on the theme at the Cameron House, Westminster Woods, the week before last, when I shared last week that I was a speaker. And last week we talked about Free to Be Me and Zacchaeus standing tall. Now we have Jesus freeing this woman so she can stand up straight. What does it mean for Jesus to free us to be who we are and who we are called to be in the world? Today, I think that freedom has to do with healing. And we know again that this is set in the context of the Sabbath. And this Sabbath context has to do with freedom. Freedom from work, freedom from burdens, freedom from responsibilities. On the Sabbath day, we are able to be recreated in God's image. We are able to be restored to wholeness. And since we know that Luke cites the Sabbath reference that has to do with animals, he is possibly quoting from the Deuteronomy commandment on the Sabbath rather than the Exodus. And in Deuteronomy 5:15, it says, God is speaking, and this is in the context of the Sabbath commandment, all the other things about the Sabbath that are also listed in Exodus, but Deuteronomy includes this. Remember that you were a slave in the land of Egypt, and that the Lord your God brought you out from there with a mighty hand and an outstretched arm. Therefore the Lord your God commanded you to keep the Sabbath day. Isn't that interesting? In this context, the Sabbath day has to do with freedom from bondage. Jesus wants us to be free from that which holds us back, and the Sabbath is a part of that. And Jesus sees the Pharisees' complaint against his healing on the Sabbath to be antithetical to that kind of freedom. Jesus wants to restore this woman to wholeness so she can enjoy the same Sabbath freedoms that others do. And we notice that Jesus wants that freedom for everyone. There is not a set of criteria that deems some worthy and others not. He wants this woman to be included in that fold as well. And what strikes me about this passage is how holistic Jesus' healing is. We look throughout the Gospels, and Jesus' healings are very holistic. And I think that was part of Jesus' context of being steeped in Jewish spirituality at the time, which would have been a holistic model. It would have included body, soul, and spirit. Not the split that Western culture came in and tried to sever those from each other. In Hebrew, it would be the nefesh, the neshama, and the ruach, which relates to body, which is more than body, but it relates to body and soul and spirit. If you think of the analogy of a tree, it's kind of like the roots and the trunk and the branches. I thought this was interesting when I was first studying Tai Chi, and one of the Tai Chi moves is the unifying of the three powers, heavens, community, earth. I thought, wow, this is just like the Hebrew notion of nefesh, neshama, and ruach. How interesting when you see different spiritual patterns overlaying on top of each other. So this is how I see Jesus healing in a holistic way on the realm of the body and the soul and the spirit. And we notice it in today's passage. First of all, Jesus always takes care of the physical. He values that and says it's important. It is just important as the spiritual life as other things we might do that we might consider spiritual. For example, Jesus was brought here to teach and to share love. That's part of his mission, as he declares, and yet he always takes care of the physical need. If someone is suffering, he knows they're not going to be able to access that teaching in the same way, so he heals them first, or he tends to their needs first. Like when we think about the feeding of the 5,000. He had been teaching, the day was long, the sun was going down. He could have sent everybody home to just get their own food, which is what the disciples wanted to do, and he said, no, we need to feed them. So he blesses the food and distributes it and makes sure people have what they need so they can receive this teaching. And again and again and again, of course, he heals on a physical level as well, because he knows that that is important in terms of people having the healing that they need to continue. I think that we can assess this in our modern lives by saying that we need to value things like rest and some of the other Sabbath activities of getting a healthy diet and food and community. Might even be something that we need that is medicinal, like healing herbs. Again, I think that Jesus is saying this is just as important as some of the other things we might do. I noticed this myself last week when Noreen and I had a meeting, and we thought we would follow up with the meeting by going to tea, and we were going to go and try and find a tea shop where we thought we could sit down and actually talk to each other and drink tea. And of course, the tea shops we ran into, the one we wandered into, there wasn't really a lot of sitting and talking. There was a lot of sitting and listening to the person who was selling us the tea, doing the tasting. And it ended up being very entertaining and a fabulous cultural experience, actually, because we ended up with Uncle Uncle G, at a tea shop on Grand Street, and I highly recommend it if you have friends in town that need a dose of that. And it was fascinating because he was so excited about all the different teas that he had. He goes back and forth to China twice a year. And the medicinal qualities of all of these teas. He could tell us exactly what this tea would do for you, whatever your ailment was, how it would help you. So he sold me on one of the teas. And I went home and I tried it, and I'm telling you, I felt like a new woman the next day. It was very healing. I'm thinking, now I'm brewing my little Chinese tea every morning, I'm taking it with me, and I'm thinking, this is fascinating, I love this. And I love that holistic sense of Chinese medicine that is so holistic, whether it's your tea or the herbs you're taking or whatever. It is this whole body, mind, spirit. And I'm telling you, there was a piece of that tea that helped me access some spiritual notion of God because my body was stabilized in a way that then I could do the other things I needed to do. Taking care of my body, even with this medicinal tea, helped me do the other things I needed to do. I think Jesus tells us this is important. This is valuable. We need to value this as much as we value other things in our spiritual path. That's part of the reason why Jesus healed her physical body.